Foreman collapsed. His nearly 200-pound body toppled like a wall, suddenly giving way. The entire stadium, which minutes before had been gripped by tension, erupted in a deafening roar. Ali hadn't just won, he'd knocked out a man who seemed invincible. The cameras focused on his sweaty, tired face, yet charged with something greater than mere triumph. The impossible had happened before the eyes of the world. At that precise moment, Kinshasa ceased to be the stage for a boxing match and became the setting for a historic event that would forever mark the sport. As Foreman struggled to his feet, still dazed, Ali raised his arms and shouted to the crowd, "I told you I was the greatest." And it didn't seem like just a catchphrase, it was confirmation of a truth everyone needed to admit. The fight wasn't just physical, it was psychological. For 8 rounds, Ali withstood every devastating punch, leaning against the ropes, as if staging his own defeat. The crowd feared the worst. He won't make it, he's not the same anymore, commentators and even his own fans murmured. But behind the apparent vulnerability lay calculation. The rope-a-dope, his strategy of resistance, transformed Foreman's strength into weakness. Every punch that landed on his body also drained energy from the undefeated champion. When the world believed Ali was being crushed, he was merely preparing the most iconic comeback in boxing history. And then the moment arrived. The right hand, precise, well-aimed, struck Foreman squarely. It wasn't just the downfall of a man, it was the downfall of an era, of a narrative that claimed Ali was finished, that the throne no longer belonged to him. Hearing the referees count, Ali knew he had been resurrected before the eyes of the world. All of Zaire chanted his name. Ali, the same man who had been banned from fighting for defying the United States government, was now celebrated as a universal hero. That night, titles or belts didn't matter. What mattered was the symbol that rose from the ropes and silenced doubt. But while the crowd celebrated, Ali breathed heavily, feeling the weight of victory in every aching muscle. The toll of that night would be taken on his body for years to come. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the truth etched in every gaze. He wasn't just a champion, he was the greatest. Greatest not as an empty nickname, but as a testament etched in blood and sweat. The world would never look at him the same way again. That was the moment history split. Before the rumble in the jungle, Ali was a fading idol, seen as too arrogant, too bold. Afterward, he became a living legend, a symbol of resilience and courage. He was no longer just a boxer, he was the voice of a generation that needed to believe the impossible could happen. Kinshasa witnessed not just a sporting victory, but a life lesson. Even when everyone expects you to fall, it is possible to rise greater than ever. And this fight didn't end in the ring. It echoed around the world, crossing borders, religions, and cultures. Men and women who had never seen a boxing match chanted his name like a prayer. Ali wasn't just a heavyweight champion, he was a champion of something greater, the human faith. In overcoming adversity, while Foreman retreated, defeated and incredulous, Ali stood as living proof that courage, discipline, and boldness can change destinies. The greatest had been confirmed, not by self-proclamation, but by a truth no one could deny. But the legacy of that night went far beyond the gloves and the ring. This was just the first step in a consecration that would change the meaning of the sport forever. Because when Ali stepped down from that ring, he no longer belonged to boxing, he belonged to the world. And it was exactly at that moment that the myth stopped being a myth and became an indisputable truth. The noise in the stadium still echoed as Ali left. The ring, men, women, and even children leaned over the barriers, trying to touch him, reaching out as if that contact were a piece of history itself. The champion walked slowly, covered in sweat and exhaustion, but his face bore something beyond victory. It was the expression of someone who knew he had just proven to the world that he was not just a fighter, he was a symbol. In that moment, Kinshasa was not just an African city, it was the beating heart of the planet. The people of Zaire chanted Ali Bomé, Ali Bomé, as if repeating a truth that would become eternal. The press, which weeks before had treated him like a dead horse, now surrendered. Journalists who had written that he would never withstand Foreman's brute strength, now jostled to record every word, every gesture. I told you I was the greatest," Ali repeated, staring straight into the camera. It wasn't arrogance, it was justice. Because when everyone doubted him, he endured. When everyone expected him to fall, he stood. And when the impossible seemed certain, he made the impossible a reality. This wasn't just a sporting victory. It was the confirmation of a man who dared to challenge the world and emerged victorious. But the real fight hadn't begun in Kinshasa. It had been going on for years, when Ali had his title taken away for refusing to fight in Vietnam. They called him a coward, a traitor, an unpatriotic fighter. He was banished, persecuted, and humiliated. The same man who was now celebrated as a global hero had been treated as an enemy in his own land. This contradiction made the triumph all the more powerful. Ali wasn't just fighting Foreman, he was fighting against the label of finished, against those who tried to silence him, against the narrative that condemned him before the fight even began, and the world felt it. In every corner, in every country, millions followed that fight as if witnessing something beyond sport. For the African people, Ali was not just a boxer, he was living proof that a black man could rise up against the system, challenge powers, and triumph. For young people on every continent, he became an example of courage, showing that the words, "I can't" carry no weight in the face of discipline and self-belief. For his enemies, silence remained, because the image of Foreman fallen, and Ali's standing was indisputable. But there was also the human toll of that night. In the locker room, away from the cameras, Ali sat, breathing deeply, every muscle throbbing with pain. He knew his strategy had taken a heavy toll on his body. His swollen face, aching ribs, and extreme exhaustion were proof that there was no miracle, only courage and endurance. Was it worth it? Someone on the team asked him. He simply smiled and replied, "Now they know who I am." This sentence wasn't about vanity. It was about justice. It was about the right to be remembered, not as a boxer who grew old and fell, but as the man who redefined the very concept of greatness. The impact was immediate. In the following days, newspapers that had previously criticized him featured his image on their covers. Headlines that mixed admiration and disbelief. Powerful men, politicians, and rivals alike had to admit, Muhammad Ali had proven himself not only as a champion, but as a legend. And more than that, he had become part of the planet's collective memory. The greatest was no longer an empty nickname. It was now an indisputable title, engraved not on belts, but in the minds of everyone who saw him that night, and the legacy that emerged there wasn't limited to the ring. The victory in Kinshasa was also the victory of all those who had ever been discredited, rejected, called dreamers or fools. There he had shown that resisting criticism, enduring falls, and waiting for the right moment to get back up was what transformed men into giants. The rumble in the jungle was much more than a fight. It was confirmation that courage and redemption go hand in hand. And if this story touched you, if it gave you goosebumps imagining Ali enduring everything to ultimately prove to the world he was the greatest, then this is the perfect time. Like now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next chapters of this journey that shows how boxing was just the beginning of a legacy that became eternal. Because the story isn't over yet. Victory didn't stay in the ring. It permeated airports, newspapers, and classrooms. In poor neighborhoods from Lagos to Chicago, boys repeated the same gesture, lightly tapping their chests, lifting their chins, whispering, "I can do it." Teachers cited the fight to discuss strategy. Pastors spoke of faith. Activists saw it as a manual of courage. It became a compass. It wasn't just the final punch. It was the silence before it, the calculation, the patience of someone who takes a beating without losing their soul. And the message spread. It's possible to win when no one believes. Posters with his face plastered across barbershops, bakeries, and community halls. In prisons, young men copied phrases, rehearsed shadowbox moves. In small rings, coaches repeated, "Hold on, breathe, wait your minute." Kinshasa became a verb, and each replay of Foreman's fall reminded them of something else. To be a giant, sometimes you have to appear fragile for a while. Mothers told their children that night as a secret, and tired fathers went back to dreaming in low voices. Again, he knew that a belt doesn't change the world, but a story does. After Kinshasa, Ali began accepting invitations that didn't yield. Trophies, university debates, hospital visits, meetings with young people who saw no way out. He would enter rooms without posing and say simply, "I've fallen many times, and still I came back." The audience listened to the pauses between his words, like someone listening to a survivor. They asked about his refusal to fight in Vietnam. He spoke of conscience. They asked about the price. He spoke of losing everything and still sleeping peacefully. It was there that the myth became a mirror. Each saw their own struggle reflected, and without a script, he repeated, "Resisting is tiring, but giving up takes more." The press tried to reduce this man to a headline, and failed. In interviews, rivals admitted, he won before touching the glove, because he spoke to something that lies behind fear. Foreman, one day, would say he learned from defeat and found peace. Ali smiled when he heard it. Complete victory is one that leaves no hatred in its wake. But there was a new sign. Hands that trembled more than before. Fatigue that wouldn't go away. He hid it, straightened his coat, took a deep breath. He knew his body would take its toll, and yet he continued, because now, the fight wasn't against a man, it was against cynicism, and he continued without asking for applause. Steadfast art with each trip. The title changed names. At a children's hospital, it was the champion who bent down to the size of a child. In a forgotten neighborhood, it was the man who took off his jacket to cover a cold teenager. Photographers recorded him, but his strength lay in what didn't fit in the photo. The time he stayed, the attention he gave, the way he listened. Unhurriedly, a girl tugged at his sleeve and asked if courage hurt. He replied softly, "It hurts when we're alone. When we're together, it hurts less." And the entire room believed it. For a moment, in another corner, businessmen wanted to exploit him further. In another, politicians tried to exploit his image. There, he said no when no was necessary, and said yes when yes saved someone from giving up. Criticism came. They called him a show-off, a shop window saint. He smiled and carried on because he already knew that applause and booing are brothers. The tremor in his hands grew gradually. To many, it seemed nervous. To him, it was a warning. Even so, he greeted every employee, every gym cleaner, every cook who served him soup. He repeated names, recalled stories, restored dignity in small ways. That's how boxing became a language, and humanity, a legacy. For him, it was a warning, and it stuck. Even when the lights went out, the work continued. In his hotel room, he wrote thank you notes to anonymous people, drivers, security guards, cooks. He spoke of his father who taught him to lift his chin, his mother who taught him to lift his heart. He prayed silently, and he woke early to repeat the marathon of meetings, hugs, and short speeches. The managers wanted big stages. He preferred musty gymnasiums, school auditoriums, small churches with crooked pews. There, he discovered that the heaviest title wasn't the belt, it was the reference. Being the example hurts, but he carried it like one carries a wounded friend, slowly, without letting go. And, as his body slowed, his voice gained a gravity no camera could deny. A former critic approached him in a hallway and apologized for the names he'd called him. In the past, he shook the man's hand and said, "I've made a lot of mistakes too, we're even." The room breathed a sigh of relief, and everyone understood it was a sign. The entire stadium froze as the camera closed in on his face. His hands trembled, the flame wavered, and for a moment it seemed the world lost its air. There was no belt, no referee, no ropes. There was silence. It was another fight. A volunteer whispered, "Are you ready?" He didn't take his eyes off the cauldron. "I was born ready." The tremor didn't ask for permission. It was a memory of wars without bullets, of bells and sleepless nights. When Ali raised the torch, the fire rose like someone finding a home. The stadium, which had roared minutes before, now bowed to the fragility that couldn't be hidden. Some closed their eyes, others placed their hands on their chests. There was respect, there was a silent understanding. Those trembling hands had once held the world, and yet, they remained firm enough to light an entire country. At the top of the arena, a boy murmured, "He won again." The phrase ran through the rows like an electric current. The flame stabilized, and the stadium breathed along with it. Backstage that night, before the torch, they'd been told it wasn't wise. "What if my hand fails?" a doctor asked. He replied, "If it fails, I'll hold on with my heart." The crew exchanged glances. His wife squeezed his fingers and whispered, "Only go if it's for all of us." He nodded. The walk to the platform seemed endless. Each step was a new round. His body warmed with small shocks, and his memory brought back Kinshasa ropes, sweat, voices telling him he wouldn't make it. "I won't fall," he repeated, as if praying. A production man tried to lighten his load. "Champion, if you want, I'll carry it for you." Ali smiled. "My friend, there are things no one carries for us," and he continued. Protocol demanded calm, but his heart wanted to race. There was a slight stumble, muffled by the carpet. There was a pause that was too long. There was a painful breath. Then he felt the heat on his face, the distant sound of the stadium, and he understood that that small climb was, in fact, the biggest climb of his life. Years after Kinshasa, he met up with old rivals on shows, in churches, and in arena hallways. He hugged Foreman with the strength of a brother. He whispered in his ear, "You made me better," and heard back, "You made me find peace." The cameras loved the gesture, but what mattered came later. Without an audience, a simple afternoon, 2 plastic chairs, slow laughter, stories of fear. He apologized for hurtful remarks. The other apologized for jokes that crossed the line. Ollie responded with humor, "I overdid it, but you also hit too hard." They laughed. The reconciliation made the news, but the real miracle was in their eyes. Light, grateful. With Fraser, the road was harder. There was silence. There was hurt. There were attempts. He learned that courage also knows how to ask for forgiveness, and he began teaching this to boys wearing cheap gloves. Winning is good, but better is to leave the fight without hatred clinging to your skin. In schools, he said, rivalry doesn't have to turn into poison. Champions become people. Yes, the diagnosis gained a name, and the name gained silence. He didn't announce tragedy, he just kept appearing. He signed gloves slowly, trembling, and didn't hide his hand. A child asked if he was afraid. "I am, but I walk with it," he replied. On humanitarian visits, he traded speeches for presents. He entered flooded homes, ate at the tables of ordinary people, and took off his watch to donate without ceremony. In mosques, he prayed humbly. In churches, he listened respectfully. He spoke little, but said a lot. Being great isn't about shouting. It's about keeping coming, he repeated. Commercial invitations grew, and he chose what didn't betray his history. He turned down easy contracts, accepted projects that funded clinics and scholarships. In hospital corridors, he held the head of a young man in crisis and whispered, "You can handle it." The tremors became a teacher, and, before the mirror, he accepted the student he saw, without pity or vanity. That was how he remained whole. The body gave in, but the character did not. I was grateful that torch didn't just illuminate a stadium. It ignited a conclusion. Greatest wasn't a nickname. It was a public commitment. Kinshasa proved courage in the fire of the ring. Atlanta proved redemption and exposed fragility. First, he defeated monsters of flesh and blood. Then, he overcame the fear of ridicule, the haste of cynics, the temptation to hide, and he chose to remain visible. Every short step, every crooked letter in his signature, every pause in his voice were bricks in a statue that couldn't fit in bronze. Ollie taught that glory isn't an eternal scream, it's an echo that returns when someone needs to rise. So, when the flames stabilized and the stadium exploded, it wasn't an applause to the past, it was an oath to the future, to carry light even while trembling. And under that glow, the question that remained was straightforward. What remains when the body falls silent? What continues when the sound of the gloves fades? The final chapter answers without tricks, as he would, showing what remains in us after the lights go out. The scene that remained was a simple and definitive tableau. Foreman on the ground, Ollie with his arms raised, the entire stadium in shock. Ollie didn't ask for silence or apology. He simply took a deep breath, as if closing one door and opening another. The proof was in. The title, The Greatest, ceased to be bravado and became a public document, sealed by sweat, strategy, and real risk. There was no trick, only calculation and courage. 8 rounds of patience, a precise snap, and history changed hands. Since that night in Zaire, each replay of the final blow seemed to say the same phrase. I told you so, but the victory didn't end in the ring, it jumped the rope and entered the world. On street corners, in schools, in temples, anywhere someone needed to believe again. The verdict wasn't handed down by a referee, it was handed down by time. And time, relentless with false heroes, decided to keep him standing. From that moment on, the nickname became a mission, and the mission demanded daily presence. Kinshasa, taught how to win without screaming. The rope-a-dope ceased to be a boxing trick, and became a way of life. Absorb without giving in, conserve strength, wait for the giant's failure, and when it comes, advance with precision. Hang in, breathe. Wait your minute, repeated coaches who had never set foot in Zaire. Ollie showed that resistance is also attack, only at the right time. And this manual crossed borders. A boy in the outskirts heard his father say, "When life puts you against the rope, be alert." A teacher translated it into a lesson. Strategy is courage with a clock. In services and assemblies, the fight became a parable, and, while the image of Foreman falling traveled the world, another message ran alongside it. Without caption, greatness isn't charisma, it's commitment. It wasn't about being untouchable. It was about being responsible for those watching. The ring was just the stage. Ollie wrote the text with measured blows and bruised shoulders, handwriting firm enough to span generations. But the greatest seal didn't come unscathed. Before Kinshasa, he lost everything by refusing to betray his conscience. They took away his title, his livelihood, his voice. They called him a traitor, and he stood his ground anyway. This price isn't a biographical detail, it's the foundation of the monument, because courage, without cost, is decoration. By refusing Vietnam, he told the world, "My victory must fit my faith," and he paid for it with years out of the ring. When he returned, he didn't seek revenge. He sought meaning. He won fights, lost speed, learned to breathe differently. He gave the microphone back to those who didn't have one. He stopped at hospitals, went to schools, visited prisons, sat on the floor to hear stories no belt hears. Being great isn't about winning debates, he told a young man. It's about not losing your head when no one believes in you. There was booing, there was applause, and he treated both as noises from the same radio. He kept going, because greatness that is explained too much ends up being small. When the torch reached his weary hands, the word redemption took shape. The world waited for the stumble. He delivered clarity. The tremor didn't shame him. It became part of the ritual. "What if I fail?" a hurried producer asked him. "I hold on with my heart," he replied, without posing. The flame rose, the stadium stopped, and it became clear, the same person who had endured the blows of an undefeated champion now endured the judgment of millions on his fragility. It was the same courage, exposed in a different way. Kinshasa proved strength, Atlanta proved character. In between there was forgiveness for rivals. A hand extended to those who hurt him, belated laughter with those who once hated him. Foreman called that night a blessing. Frazier, with his pain, received sincere attempts at peace. There, he understood that defeating someone is not enough. Overcoming resentment is the work of a giant. And he continued teaching, even when his voice needed pauses. The torch was not a ceremonial gesture. It was a lesson in living fire. His legacy didn't fit in a museum. It appeared in the gesture of a coach embracing a loser, in the referee explaining things respectfully, in the businessman refusing a dirty contract, in the boy who breathes 3 times before reacting. The greatest stopped meaning the one who hits the hardest to mean the one who doesn't give up on others. There he showed that fame without service is noise, and that pain without purpose becomes ruin. He laughed at himself, insisted on the name of the invisible employee, took off his watch to donate it, repeated simple phrases like someone sharpening a knife. Stay whole, don't sell your conscience, win without turning to stone. And when his body called for a truce, he responded with presence. He arrived, trembling. He signed slowly. He posed for photos that took time. He taught through his own failure that dignity doesn't need a perfect image, it needs truth. And, therefore, his was always in the eyes of those who met him, a gleam of someone who won't abandon you in the final round. The title's confirmation, then, is this. The greatest of all doesn't end with the referee's countdown, it ends with what's left in us when the lights go out. If the scene that closes the world's eyes is Foreman falling, the scene that opens ours is a crowd that learned to rise. When life pushes you to the ropes, remember the lesson: protect, observe, save, wait, and, at the right moment, advance without cruelty, with precision and purpose. Carry the torch even if your hand trembles. Ask for forgiveness when the time is right. Refuse victories that demand your peace. And, if some voice calls you crazy for believing, respond with work, not with a shout. The greatness he left behind doesn't fit in a trophy. It fits in each small decision that chooses courage with tenderness. Because the title was confirmed in the ring, but the legacy was confirmed in people. And that's why, today, the phrase doesn't sound like a slogan, it sounds like a task. To be greater is to transform pain into light for those who come after.